Ever catch yourself daydreaming about a world where governments can just, like, fund those big, ambitious projects we all dream of?
Oh, yeah.
Things like free healthcare, a massive shift to green energy,
Yeah.
maybe even a universal basic income.
Right.
And all of this without, the usual song and dance about raising taxes.
Yeah, it'd be amazing.
It sounds almost too good to be true.
It does.
Well, that's the kind of promise that's got people buzzing about modern monetary theory, better known as MMT.
Yeah, MMT. It's a really fascinating idea, isn't it?
It is.
It's really shaking things up in the world of economics, challenging a lot of the traditional thinking that we've, all come to accept about how governments should handle their finances.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. I mean, we've all been there, feeling the pinch of limited resources, constantly hearing we can't afford that when it comes to things that feel truly essential.
Yeah. Absolutely.
It can be incredibly frustrating, especially when we see the scale of the problems we're facing as a society.
It is.
And then MMT comes along. It's like, well, why not just print more money?
Yeah.
It sounds almost radical, doesn't it?
It does. It does. And that's precisely why it's sparking so much debate.
Yeah.
At its core, MMT suggests that, under the right circumstances, governments actually can create more money to fund public spending without necessarily causing the kind of runaway inflation that we all fear.
Right.
But this idea hinges on a really crucial concept, something called spare capacity in the economy.
Right. Okay, so to understand MMT and to grasp this whole concept of spare capacity, we need to take a little trip back in time, right?
You do.
You need to understand how money itself has evolved over the centuries. Let's imagine for a moment a world, long before credit cards, debit cards, even paper money.
Oh, wow.
A world where people relied on bartering systems to get by.
It's hard to imagine, really.
I know, right?
It might seem incredibly archaic to us now.
It does.
But bartering was for a long time the primary way people exchanged goods and services.
It was, yeah.
Picture a farmer trading a basket of apples for a pair of handmade sandals.
Yeah.
Or a blacksmith trading tools for a few sacks of grain. It was a system based on direct exchange.
Right.
And while it worked,
Yeah.
it had its limitations.
Of course. Imagine trying to navigate the modern world using a bartering system.
I know, right?
How would you buy groceries, pay your rent, get that new phone you've been eyeing?
Forget about it.
It'd be absolute chaos.
Total chaos.
So that's why over time, people started using things that were relatively scarce, durable, and easily divisible as a medium of exchange.
Makes sense.
Right.
Yeah.
Things like seashells,
Oh, interesting.
beads, even large stones became early forms of money.
Wow, I never thought about that.
Right.
Yeah.
They provided a more standardized and efficient way to trade goods and services. They did, yeah.
But as societies grew more complex and trade expanded, these early forms of money proved inadequate.
Yeah, I can see that.
That's when precious metals like gold and silver came to the forefront.
Oh, of course, gold and silver, yeah.
Right. Gold and silver had several advantages.
Yeah.
They were valuable, relatively rare,
Uh,
and could be easily divided into smaller units, coins making them ideal for transactions of all sizes.
right.
This shift to precious metals as currency represented a major leap forward in terms of convenience and efficiency.
For sure. Can you imagine trying to, buy a house
Yeah.
by hauling around sacks of seashells?
Oh my gosh, no.
That wouldn't be very practical, would it?
No, not at all.
Gold and silver, especially in the form of coins, made transactions much smoother.
Much, much smoother.
But even coins had their limitations.
Yeah.
As trade continued to grow and economies expanded, carrying around large quantities of gold and silver
Became a problem.
became really cumbersome
Yeah.
and risky.
It wasn't exactly the safest way to travel. And let's face it, those heavy pouches of coins couldn't have been comfortable.
No, they couldn't have. So what emerged as a lighter, more portable solution? Paper money.
Ah, paper money. Okay.
But those early versions of paper money weren't quite like the bills we use today.
Right.
They were essentially IOUs, receipts that promised the holder a certain amount of gold or silver held in reserve by a merchant or a bank.
Interesting.
Think of it like an early form of a check.
Okay, yeah.
Over time, government stepped in, issuing their own paper money,
Okay.
and initially backing it with those reserves of precious metals like gold.
Got it.
This is how the gold standard came into being.
Right.
For a good chunk of history, the value of a country's currency was directly linked to a fixed quantity of gold. It provided a sense of stability and predictability to the monetary system.
Right.
But as economies became more interconnected and complex, the limitations of the gold standard became increasingly apparent.
They did. It restricted the ability of governments to manage their economies effectively, especially during times of crisis.
Right.
So gradually, throughout the 20th century, most countries, including the United States, abandoned the gold standard.
They did.
This marked the beginning of the era of fiat currency, where the value of money is backed not by a tangible commodity like gold, but by something far less tangible, trust, and the decree of the issuing government.
So here we are today.
Here we are.
Living in a world dominated by fiat currency. The vast majority of the money we use exists digitally.
It does.
Created through the actions of central banks. And this fascinating system called fractional reserve banking.
This shift to fiat currency has, in many ways, been incredibly empowering for governments.
Oh, for sure.
It's given them a great deal of flexibility in managing their economies and responding to crises.
It has.
But it's also raised some profound questions, especially when it comes to MMT. If governments can essentially create money electronically, why bother with taxes at all? Why not simply print our way out of every economic problem?
Exactly.
It seems almost too simple, doesn't it?
It does. That's the million-dollar question, isn't it?
It is.
And it takes us right to the heart of the debate surrounding modern monetary theory.
It does.
The answer, in short, lies in the concept of inflation.
Of course.
While MMT argues that governments have far more leeway in creating money than we've traditionally been led to believe, it absolutely does not advocate for reckless printing of money.
No, it doesn't. And this is where the concept of spare capacity comes into play. It's absolutely fundamental to understanding how MMT works and why it's generating so much discussion. In essence, spare capacity refers to the untapped potential within an economy. It's about recognizing that an economy rarely operates at its full capacity. There are almost always unused resources available. Things like factories operating below their production limits, workers who are unemployed or underemployed, and raw materials that are readily available.
I see.
You think of it like a car engine that's idling. It has the potential to generate much more power, but it's not currently being utilized. And according to MMT, when an economy has significant spare capacity, the government can inject money into the system through targeted spending without automatically triggering runaway inflation. This spending can stimulate demand, create jobs, and put those idle resources to work. Imagine the government investing in a large-scale infrastructure project like building new roads or bridges that would create jobs in the construction industry, leading to increased demand for materials like steel and concrete. Those industries, in turn, would ramp up production and hire more workers, setting off a ripple effect throughout the economy. And as long as there's enough spare capacity to meet this increased demand, prices should theoretically remain relatively stable. This is why proponents of MMT argue that it can be a powerful tool for achieving full employment and funding essential public goods without the need for excessive taxation.
It sounds promising, but it also begs the question, what happens when an economy is already running at full capacity? What if we hit that limit? That point where there are no more idle resources available?
That's where things get a bit more complicated. If the government keeps injecting money into an economy that's already operating at its limit, it's a bit like trying to cram more people into an already packed elevator. You're likely to encounter some resistance. And in the case of an economy, that resistance often manifests as inflation.
So it's about finding that sweet spot, that balance between stimulating the economy and avoiding the kind of inflationary pressures that can erode purchasing power and destabilize the whole system.
Exactly. And this is where the role of taxes becomes particularly interesting in the context of MMT.
So if governments can create money electronically, why bother with taxes at all? It seems counterintuitive, doesn't it?
It does. But in the MMT framework, taxes serve a couple of crucial functions.
Okay.
First, They help to establish the value and dominance of a government's currency.
Right.
If citizens are required to pay their taxes in a particular currency, it creates a demand for that currency.
Okay.
People need to earn it to fulfill their tax obligations.
Right.
This demand, in turn, helps to maintain the currency's stability and ensures its widespread acceptance.
So it's not just about collecting money to spend.
Right.
It's about reinforcing the use of the currency itself.
Precisely. And the second key function of taxes, according to MMT,
Right.
is their ability to help regulate inflation.
Gotcha.
Think of it like a pressure valve in a system.
Okay.
When the government spends money,
Yeah.
it injects more currency into the economy.
Right.
When it taxes, it withdraws currency.
Okay. So by adjusting tax rates,
Yeah.
the government can fine-tune the amount of money circulating in the economy, helping to prevent that overheating we talked about earlier.
Makes sense. That's the idea.
It is.
It's about maintaining a balance between spending and taxation.
Exactly.
To keep the economy humming along smoothly,
Right.
without letting things get out of control.
Yeah. And this is where MMT diverges quite sharply from the traditional view that governments should always strive for a balanced budget.
It almost seems counterintuitive to suggest that running a deficit could actually be a good thing.
It does, yeah.
But that's one of the central arguments of MMT.
Exactly. MMT suggests that deficits aren't necessarily inherently bad.
Right.
And in some cases, they can be a vital tool for stimulating economic growth,
Okay.
especially during periods of recession or economic stagnation.
Interesting. Think about the massive government spending programs that were implemented during the Great Depression, like the New Deal in the United States.
Those programs, which involved significant deficit spending, helped to pull the country out of a deep economic crisis and put millions of people back to work.
They did.
And more recently, we saw a similar approach taken during the COVID-19 pandemic.
Right.
With governments around the world injecting trillions of dollars into their economies to prevent a complete collapse.
Exactly.
These actions, in many ways, align with the core principles of MMT.
They do.
But those actions also fueled concerns about inflation,
right,
which we've certainly seen play out in recent years.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
The debate about the scale and duration of those spending programs is ongoing.
Yeah.
And it highlights the real-world complexities of applying MMT principles.
Right.
There's a delicate balance to be struck between providing enough stimulus to support a struggling economy and avoiding the unintended consequences of excessive spending.
Okay. So as with any economic theory, there's a spectrum of opinions on MMT.
There is.
With some economists wholeheartedly embracing it, and others expressing deep skepticism.
Exactly.
Yeah. Proponents of MMT, like economist Stephanie Kelton, argue that it offers a path to achieving full employment and greater economic justice. They suggest that by utilizing its monetary sovereignty, a government can fund essential public services.
Yeah.
Invest in green energy and infrastructure, and even provide a universal basic income, all without being constrained by traditional notions of budget deficits.
Yeah, it's a compelling vision.
It is, isn't it?
It is.
The idea that we could utilize our monetary system to address some of the most pressing challenges facing society, rather than being held back by outdated economic dogma.
It is. And proponents of MMT point to historical examples like the success of large-scale government spending programs during times of crisis as evidence that their ideas can work in practice.
Yeah. But of course, there are critics, economists who argue that MMT oversimplifies the complexities of the global financial system and downplays the risks of inflation. They worry that it could lead to excessive government spending, unsustainable levels of debt, and ultimately the erosion of confidence in a nation's currency.
Yeah. And those concerns are certainly valid.
They are.
It's crucial to remember that MMT isn't a magic bullet solution to all of our economic problems.
Right.
It's a framework for understanding how money works in a modern economy.
Yeah.
And it offers a different way of thinking about the role of government in managing the economy.
It encourages us to question long-held assumptions about deficits, debt, and the limits of government spending.
Exactly. And ultimately, the decision of whether or not to embrace MMT principles is a political one.
Right.
It requires careful consideration of a wide range of factors, including the specific economic conditions of a country, its political system, and the values and priorities of its citizens.
So where does this leave us, the listeners, in all of this?
Yeah.
Why should we care about this complex and often confusing economic theory?
Well, for starters, understanding the basics of MMT, even if you don't agree with all of its tenets, can empower you to critically evaluate economic news and policy debates. When you hear politicians arguing about deficits, proposing tax cuts, or advocating for massive spending programs, you'll have a deeper understanding of the potential implications.
It's about developing a more informed and nuanced perspective on the forces that shape our economics lives.
Precisely. For example, when you hear calls to cut taxes or reduce the national debt, you'll be able to assess those proposals within the framework of MMT. You might ask yourself, would cutting taxes actually stimulate the economy if we already have low unemployment? Or would it just lead to higher inflation and potentially exacerbate inequality?
And you'll be better equipped to evaluate arguments about government spending on things like infrastructure, education, or healthcare through an MMT lens.
Exactly.
You might wonder, does the government actually have the fiscal space to fund these programs without triggering inflation? Or do we need to consider alternative approaches, like raising taxes or reallocating existing funds?
Exactly. These are crucial questions. And understanding the core principles of MMT can empower you to participate in these discussions more meaningfully.
It's about equipping yourself with the knowledge and tools to be a more engaged and informed citizen.
And to think critically about the assumptions and narratives that are often presented in mainstream economic discourse.
So let's delve a bit deeper into some of the potential benefits and risks associated with MMT.
Okay.
What are some of the arguments in favor of adopting this approach?
Well, as we've touched on, proponents of MMT argue that it can be a powerful tool for achieving full employment and creating a more equitable and just society. They suggest that by leveraging the government's ability to create money, we can fund essential public services, invest in areas like green energy and infrastructure, and potentially even provide a universal basic income, all without being shackled by traditional fears of deficits and debt.
It's a vision that resonates with many people.
It does.
Particularly those who are frustrated with the current state of the economy and feel that the system isn't working for them.
And it's important to acknowledge that MMT isn't just some fringe theory. It has gained traction in recent years, influencing policymakers and sparking lively debates among economists.
It has. But as with any economic theory, it's essential to consider the potential downsides and risks.
Of course.
What are some of the concerns that critics raise about MMT?
Well, the most common concerns, and we've alluded to this earlier, is the potential for inflation. Critics argue that while MMT emphasizes the importance of managing spending to avoid overheating the economy, it can be incredibly difficult to accurately gauge the precise level of spare capacity at any given time.
So there's always the risk that a government might overestimate the economy's ability to absorb new spending, leading to a surge in prices that erodes purchasing power and destabilizes the economy.
Exactly. And once inflation takes hold, it can be very difficult to bring it back under control. We've seen this play out throughout history. And it can have devastating consequences for individuals, businesses, and the overall economy.
Absolutely. Another concern is that MMT might encourage excessive government spending and lead to unsustainable levels of debt.
Critics worry that if governments feel emboldened to simply print money to fund their programs, it could erode fiscal discipline and lead to a situation where the value of the currency plummets. They point to historical examples like Venezuela or Zimbabwe, where hyperinflation rendered their currencies practically worthless.
While proponents of MMT argue that those cases are not true examples of their theory in practice, the fear of hyperinflation remains a potent argument against reckless money creation.
It does. It's a valid concern.
It is.
And it highlights the need for a balanced and responsible approach to implementing MMT principles. It's not about abandoning all fiscal restraint. It's about recognizing the potential of a nation's currency to achieve economic and social goals while carefully managing the risks.
Another concern that critics raise is the potential for MMT to crowd out private investment.
If the government is borrowing heavily and printing money, it can drive up interest rates, making it more expensive for businesses to invest and expand. This could have a chilling effect on innovation and economic growth in the long run.
I see. So the potential benefits and risks of MMT are deeply intertwined.
They are.
It's a complex and nuanced theory that requires careful consideration and a balanced approach.
It does. It's not a silver bullet solution to all of our economic challenges.
Right.
But it does offer a different way of thinking about the role of government in managing the economy.
And it encourages us to question long-held assumptions about deficits, debt, and the limits of government spending.
Exactly. It's about expanding our understanding of the tools available to us and recognizing the potential for a more proactive and purposeful approach to economic policy.
So, having explored the history of money, delved into the intricacies of MMT, and examined the arguments for and against this controversial economic idea, where do we go from here?
I think the key takeaway here is that understanding the fundamentals of money, how it's created, how it circulates, and how governments can influence its value is incredibly empowering.
Yeah.
Allows you to, engage in these critical economic debates in a much more informed and meaningful way.
It's about recognizing that money isn't this, mystical force that operates beyond our control.
Right.
It's a tool.
It is.
A social construct that we've created, and it's a tool that can be used to achieve a variety of goals.
A lot of different goals.
Yeah. And MMT challenges us to think differently about the possibilities of that tool.
It does.
It suggests that we might have more options available to us than we've traditionally been led to believe. That we don't necessarily have to accept austerity measures and limits on government spending as inevitable.
Yeah, it challenges those assumptions.
It does. But it also reminds us that there are always trade-offs to consider.
Always, yeah.
That managing an economy responsibly requires a careful balancing act.
For sure. Exactly.
Yeah. And that's why it's so crucial to engage with these ideas.
It is.
To understand the arguments for and against MMT. To weigh the potential benefits and risks. And to ultimately form your own informed opinions.
Your own informed opinions,
Don't just, passively absorb the sound bites and slogans that are thrown around in the media and political debates.
Yeah, don't just take it at face value.
No, dig deeper, explore the nuances.
That's exactly.
And engage in thoughtful discussions with people who hold different viewpoints.
It's all about that dialogue and that critical thinking.
Yeah. And remember, the goal here isn't necessarily to arrive at definitive answers.
No.
It's about expanding your understanding of these complex economic forces that shape our lives and empowering yourself to be a more informed and engaged citizen.
Exactly.
So as we wrap up this deep dive into the fascinating world of modern monetary theory, we want to leave you with a thought-provoking question to ponder.
Okay, hit us with it.
What if MMT is right?
Oh, wow.
What if governments actually do have more flexibility in creating and spending money than we've traditionally assumed, without necessarily triggering runaway inflation?
It's a big question, yeah.
It is. What are the potential implications for our society? Could we finally tackle those big, ambitious projects that have seemed out of reach for so long?
That would be amazing.
It would. Could we create a more equitable and just society? One where everyone has access to essential services, quality education, and meaningful employment.
It's a really compelling vision.
It is.
Yeah.
It is. Or would we be unleashing unintended consequences, potentially destabilizing the economy and eroding confidence in our monetary system? These are questions worth grappling with.
They are.
As we navigate the complexities of the 21st century economy.
They are tough questions, but they're important ones.
They are. And as you continue to explore these ideas, remember that knowledge is power.
It is.
The more you understand about how money works, about the forces that drive economic growth and inequality, the better equipped you'll be to participate in these critical conversations and to advocate for policies that align with your values.
Absolutely.
So, if you found this deep dive into MMT insightful and thought-provoking, we encourage you to subscribe to our podcast.
Absolutely.
We're constantly exploring fascinating topics like this.
We are.
Curating and explaining complex ideas in a way that's both engaging and informative.
We try to make it fun.
We do. And we promise to keep you entertained along the way.
Always.
Because let's face it, economics doesn't have to be dry and boring.
No, it doesn't.
It's about real people, real lives, and the choices we make as a society.
It is.
So join us on this journey of discovery, and together, let's unlock the mysteries of the economic world.
Let's do it.
Until next time, keep those brain cells buzzing.